Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvina Vaditamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May the Divine Being look over us lovingly as a mother and father. May the Divine Being support and nourish us as a mother and father. May we have the strength and skill to study together the art of spirituality. May no misunderstandings arise amongst us. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us and to all beloved beings everywhere. Well, welcome everyone and namaste. We are studying Swami Prabhavananda's book, How to Know God. This is his translation and commentary of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. A translation of and commentary on. We're in chapter 1, Yoga and its Aim. Patanjali has defined yoga, the state of union with our primordial self, our birthless, deathless self. Patanjali has defined yoga as control of the thought waves of the mind. So I'm going to go back and start with Aphorism 6. We'd gotten as far as 8, but we'll start with 6 because I want to go back to the definition. And I'll paraphrase. There are 5 kinds of thought waves: right knowledge, wrong knowledge, verbal delusion, sleep, and memory. Let me go back over those. There are 5 kinds of thought waves, according to Patanjali: right knowledge, wrong knowledge, verbal delusion, sleep, and memory. Aphorism 7. The right kinds of knowledge are direct perception, inference, and scriptural testimony. So the kinds of thought waves that generate right kinds of knowledge in our mind are direct perception, inference, and scriptural testimony. Whatever our senses perceive is right knowledge, provided that there has been no element of delusion. In other words, drinking or taking drugs or some mental condition, some neurodivergence that leads to misperception and hallucinations. Whatever we infer from our direct perception is also right knowledge, provided that our reasoning is correct. As we know from looking about us in the world today, there are different kinds of reasoning about this virus that is this pandemic. Now, we won't get into a discussion about that, but it's clear that there is some reasoning that is leading people to die. They are reasoning incorrectly. We would say, at least if they wish to live. So whatever we infer from our direct perception, our correct direct perception, is also right knowledge, provided that our reasoning is correct. The scriptures are based on the superconscious knowledge obtained by great spiritual teachers while in the state of perfect yoga. In the state of perfect yoga, in that union with the primordial, birthless, deathless self. Now, only some few people, having attained that state of realization, return to the body. It's said that they come back because they have the ego of knowledge, just a very slight ego of knowledge. For example, Adi Shankaracharya, or the ego of love, as in Narada. Narada's sutras are on the path of devotion. Adi Shankaracharya's are, of course, on the path of Jnana Yoga or Advaita Vedanta, non-dual. So these spiritual teachers that return to us and are able to pass along this knowledge are said to have a special commission from the divine that leads to this thread of the ego of knowledge or the ego of love. So I'll repeat that now. The scriptures are based upon the superconscious knowledge obtained by great spiritual teachers when in the state of perfect yoga. Therefore, they also are right knowledge. They represent a kind of direct perception far more immediate than the perceptions of the senses. And the truths they teach can be verified by anyone who attains to this superconscious vision. Now, of course, Swami Prabhupada was known to be speaking from that, having attained that superconscious vision himself. So before we go on, are there any questions, concerns, or comments about this definition of what is right knowledge? Anything from your own wisdom or experience, or anything?
Shankar.
Yes, yes.
I'd like to quickly share a story to emphasize what number 7 had said.
Yes.
I love number 7, great writings. But this really is a true story.
Okay.
But I think it's important for us to recognize that we could see something with our eyes or hear, but we could still misinterpret or twist it on our own insecurities, issues, whatever.
Ah, yes.
Many years ago, I was at a friend's house and I was sitting in the TV room. And his sister walked by the room, looked right at me, and I waved. She completely ignored me. That's what happened. I was extremely offended, wondered what the hell is her problem? What did I do wrong? And then all of a sudden, I remembered, dumbass, she's blind. I completely forgot his sister was blind. So I saw something. It was real. The sister looked right at me. I waved, but we could still misinterpret. So I think it's important for all of us to remember that, yes, we could observe something, but then the mind immediately goes into interpretation or creating a story around that immediately. And that's what I know I have to be very careful about.
Ah, very well said, Frank. Very, very well remarked. We have to be careful about our direct perception because we may have misperceived, as you said, or not remembered something important, in this case, the fact that his sister was blind. And suddenly our emotions kick in and we begin. So this is why we're taught later on in Patanjali's sutras, restrain the mind's tendency to react. Give it some time to correctly assess the situation, and then rather than react, act. So very well said, Frank. Thank you for contributing that. Anything else from anyone about this definition of the right kinds of knowledge?
Shankaraji, I think
Yes.
the Frank's experience is such a wonderful thing. The reason is we are all blind for our waking state. Because of that waking state, if we are a deluded persons, we don't see the reality, even though we perceive everything, but we don't understand the reality. That's Frank's experience is such a wonderful thing.
Yes, and thank you, Balakrishna, for remarking that. Yes, our ignorance is what we're in the process of dispelling. And of course, Patanjali says the way to dispel the ignorance is to stop its appearance in the mind. Even right knowledge ultimately must be restrained. The thought waves must be controlled. So anything else from anyone?
Yeah, Brother Shankara,
Yes, Swam.
how can we either know or sharpen our reasoning to be correct so that then we infer the right knowledge from the right perception?
This is the purpose of the further steps in yoga. First of all, the yamas and the niyamas. We'll be much more prone to reason correctly when we're not reasoning from an I, me, mind-centered world. Frank's experience, he said he was offended, and it's immediately, how could somebody just ignore me? I, me, mine. So when we replace I, me, mine with higher ways of thinking, which can be roughly summarized as thou, thee, thine, or as Swami Sridharananda, many of you know the name Sridharananda, Sridharananda said, divinize your life. Give everything, look at everything from the divine perspective. Swami Prabhavananda said the same thing when he said, give everything in life a Godward turn. When we see it through that lens of its divinity, or whether we know it directly or not yet, we presume it based on the teachings, the scriptures, and we then use that as a basis for deciding better, making better decisions about our reasoning from what we perceive.
So
Thank you.
the question I have is, the reason in this particular sutra we are talking about the right knowledge is because we want to tie it back to the previous sutra saying, how can we make mind waves that are non-painful? And this is probably a directional way to define that this is how to make thoughts non-painful, which overcrowds the painful thoughts.
Yes, in a way you're jumping ahead, but that's good. That is a good inference. Thank you. Yes, you're right.
And if I may ask another question, it really goes back. The understanding in sutras is that typically the sutras, the first few sutras, counterintuitively, like any other book, gives you the conclusion in the back. Supposedly, the sutras give you the conclusion right up front. And I was wondering, is sutra number 1, 2, 3, 4, where is that cutoff? What is the sutras that give you the takeaways before you actually start the sutras?
Well, it's number 1 and number 1 alone. What is yoga? What are we studying? Yoga is control of the thought waves in the mind. Everything follows from that.
Okay, thank you.
Is that satisfactory?
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Anything else from anyone? Good. Okay. So now we'll go on to the definition of wrong knowledge. And I'm glad we started back with 6 and 7 because there were still some questions. And this is what we know, that we can't build on a sound foundation if we still have questions in our minds about what we've already been presented with. So it's good. That's what we mean by a class. And studying the art of spirituality together, we get these things brought forward so that we have a sound foundation on which to continue to build. So Sutra number 8 of chapter 1, wrong knowledge is knowledge which is false and not based upon the true nature of its object. Now, the thing to understand about object is that for the purposes of the Yoga Sutras and this way of pursuing in Raja Yoga, there is only one subject, that is that primordial divine presence within you. Everything else, everything that is gained, everything that is known by the 5 organs of perception and by the 5 organs of action and by the mind, everything is an object. So wrong knowledge, it's said, is misperceiving the true nature of the object of perception or of action. So what does the Swami say? The classic example given in yoga literature is that of a piece of rope, which is mistaken for a snake. For those of you who aren't familiar with this, the story goes that someone is moving along in the darkness, semi-darkness. They can still see, but not very well. And they see a coil of rope. Because snakes are dangerous, and particularly in India, this is true. There are more snakes than we seem to have here. This coiled up rope is seen as a snake, and the person reacts accordingly. This is an incorrect, this is false knowledge. It's not a snake. And it's what Adi Shankaracharya calls superimposition. The mind superimposes the idea of snake on the rope for all the reasons that we can imagine. So that's this snake rope business. In this case, wrong knowledge will cause us to fear the rope and avoid it or try to kill it. People actually have done this, apparently. And they've even said, I was bitten. by that snake. Well, that's the dark side of the placebo effect, isn't it? So, any question at all about this definition of wrong knowledge? Let me just repeat the definition. Oh, I'm going the wrong direction. Hold on just a moment. Wrong knowledge is knowledge which is false and not based upon the true nature of its object. Okay. 9. Verbal delusion arises when words do not correspond to reality. Verbal delusion arises when words do not correspond to reality. Some of us may know the term gaslight based on the movie. The words used there to gaslight the person don't correspond to reality and are meant to confuse, frighten, and dominate this person. Verbal delusion arises when words do not correspond to reality. A common form of verbal delusion is jumping to conclusions. We hear somebody speaking, and from a hasty and inaccurate picture of its meaning, sorry, I missed something. We hear somebody speaking and form a hasty and inaccurate picture of its meaning. In political speeches, one often finds a double verbal delusion. The speaker believes that his words correspond to one reality, the audience attaches them to another, and both are wrong. Such expressions as the spirit of democracy, the American way of life, and so forth, bear rich crops of verbal delusion every year in the newspapers and over the radio. So, any question at all about verbal delusion as a form of wrong knowledge?
Brother Shankar?
Yes.
Just quickly, as a counselor, I have worked a lot with couples and families. And something that I find often happens is, let's say a couple, one person will say something, and I'll say to the partner, "What did you hear?" And so he may say, "Well, I can't get home any earlier." And I'll say to her, "What did you hear?" "I'm not important enough to get home early." That's so, again, I know I have to be careful because I do things like this so often in my life. And I have been being more open to how much trouble that gets me in. And I'm really trying to learn to shut up and observe what unfolds and being open to, I'm misinterpreting, I might be confused, and just being open to that possibility.
Yes. Very well said, Frank. And yes, indeed, we do not necessarily hear what is said to us. Why? Because we're projecting our inner reality onto what was said, and most particularly when we're in a contentious situation with another person, we are likely to do exactly what you said, mishear what they said. Goethe, the The poet and philosopher Goethe put it so beautifully when he said, a person sees in the world what they carry in their heart. A person sees in the world what they carry in their heart. So if in this spouse relationship that you just talked about, or significant other relationship, the person has this feeling of not being valuable enough, of the world being that way toward them, then they're much more likely to mishear something like you just said. So thank you for that, Frank. Anything else from anyone about this verbal delusion? Okay.
This is just an observation.
Yes.
It seems like the first two, which is direct knowledge and correct knowledge and wrong knowledge, it was the person and his or her thought wave. In number 9, it seems like the verbal utterances is done by somebody else, and the delusion or thought waves is happening in somebody else. So it's like two body part, and what we are really talking about is the person who's hearing, not necessarily what's happening, the person who's creating the verbal utterances.
All that would be 100% correct if we did not have this internal monologue or even internal dialogues. We may argue with someone who isn't in the room with us. I have done it. I'm sure we've all done it to some degree or another. And it's almost always based on some sort of verbal delusion, our own projections, and incorrect. But we have this internal monologue. And one of the reasons that it's so important in yoga is that we encounter, as we do our practices in yoga, we encounter what are called knots of the heart. Knots, K-N-O-T-S, knots of the heart. These are long-standing emotional, psychological, subconscious usually, issues. And we have a lot of internal conversation about them when they arise in us. And most of it is verbally delusory. Most of that internal conversation is not corresponding to a reality. It's because it's the way we see the world, as Goethe said.
This is extremely, this is very interesting, because it seems like if you're a meditator and you happen to be sitting in your cave and you really don't have a second or a third person to create the verbal delusion, the point you're making is that the verbal delusion is probably self-delusion, and it's pretty much you talking to yourself. And that, I think, probably is a big hurdle to overcome if you're in this path.
We don't have to be in a cave. We can just be sitting on our cushion, or we can be driving along in the car and something happens and it triggers one of our, pushes one of our buttons, and away we go. So this is why slowly and slowly over time, through the practice of Patanjali's yoga, we do learn to control those reactions and learn to act rather than react. It depends on our ability to hold our minds in check long enough for us to correctly assess the situation, rather than giving way to some sort of emotional or psychological reaction. Anything else from anyone?
Brother Shankara,
Yes, dear.
I heard this story in one of Swami Sarvapriyananda's talk that pertains to this, I guess, delusion in a way, or keeping the thoughts. Two monks were walking together. One was a very experienced older monk, and the second one was a novice. So as they were walking, they came to a river, and there was a lady standing on the bank of the river. And she told them, could you help me cross the river, because I don't know, I can't cross it by myself. So the older monk immediately picks her up and puts her on the shoulder, and they walk across and then reach the other side, and then he takes her and leaves her, and they walk on. After several minutes, the younger monk asks him, you know, as monks, we are not even supposed to look at women. So how come you actually carried her on your shoulder? So the older monk says, oh, I see, you're still carrying her. I left her on that riverbank a long time ago.
Yes, indeed. The young monk had been having that internal conversation with himself about right and wrong, whereas the older monk had simply done what was appropriate in the moment and then left it be. Yeah, that's a story that is much told in the Zen tradition. It is that story and stories like it. Anything else? Thank you, Swayam. Okay, now this next one. We have to stop and go to the science to know how truthful it is. Sleep is a wave of thought about nothingness, no thingness. There's no object there, no thing, and yet the mind goes on generating thought waves, and we know it's true. And there are several different kinds of thought waves that are very dominant during sleep, during our REM sleep, as it's called, where we're dreaming. And then that has objects. And then there's deep sleep, and that's what this is talking about, deep sleep, in which there is no thing, there is no object of even in the dream world, and yet there are thought waves. So sleep is a wave of thought about nothingness. That is to say, dreamless sleep is not an absence of thought waves in the mind, but a positive experience of nothingness. It cannot, therefore, be confused with the waveless state of yoga. If there were no thought waves in the mind during sleep, we should not wake remembering that we knew nothing. As S. Radhakrishnan remarks in his something philosophy, Indian philosophy, M. So-and-so, after a good sleep, goes on being Mr. So-and-so. As Radhakrishnan remarks in his Indian philosophy, Mr. So-and-so, after a good sleep, goes on being Mr. So-and-so, since his experiences unite themselves to the system which existed at the time when he went to sleep. They link themselves to his thoughts and do not fly to any others. This is our habitual way of doing things. It's one of the reasons that we're taught by Sri Krishna in the Gita to separate ourselves from all of this by offering it before we go to sleep and then offering it when we wake up. so that we begin to break this continuity of thought waves that seems to create the reality we experience. Such continuity of experience makes it necessary for us to admit a permanent self underlying all contents of consciousness. Is that clear? Is that conclusion that the Swami makes? Such continuity of experience. Who is creating this continuity of experience? Such continuity of experience makes it necessary for us to admit a permanent self, capital S, underlying all contents of consciousness. So any comments or questions or concerns about what was said?
Brother Shankara?
Yes.
What are the difference in the thought waves in the deep sleep versus the dream state?
Well, in the dream state, there is content. There are things you're experiencing just as we do when we're awake, sort of. We're having experiences, and we actually may wake up if we're being chased by a tiger in the dream, as Sri Ramakrishna says. We may wake up with our heart beating fast and we're panting. But in deep sleep, there is no thing, there is no object of experience, no thingness, nothingness. So that's the difference. In
So
deep
there's
sleep,
only one thought wave in the deep sleep.
well, actually, the scientists have discovered there are at least three that are dominant. Those who meditate are more likely to have just one or two thought waves during deep sleep, and they're much less likely to dream.
I see.
They're less likely to have dreams.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the question. Anything else from anyone?
So when we are talking about in the dream state, the content of the dream probably drives whether the experience is positive or negative. Contrasting that to when you don't have dream, how does nothingness drive a positive experience, which is really what's said in this text here?
Well, it's simply that there is a great restfulness in not being entangled with thingness, with dreams may be pleasant, but they are in one way or another, pleasant or unpleasant, they are involving. They're entangling. We may remember them when we wake up in the morning. They are so strong. So we have this difficulty separating ourselves from what happened when we're asleep and when we're awake. If we dream a lot, when we're in deep sleep and there is no thing, we're not entangled. It's the closest thing that we have to a meditative or samadhi experience, but we don't learn from it because there's no knowing, because there's no thing to know.
And tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm still going back to the painful thoughts and the non-painful thoughts, or klishta and aklishta. And if I really put that spectrum here, and I'm trying to take the positive/negative experience of a dream, then I will put that somewhere in that klishta aklishta continuum. But is this telling me that the dreamless state is not in that continuum, but we're closer to a meditative state?
Yes, exactly. And I have something else to say here. I mistimed my meds today. And so I take something called Lasix, and I have to go and use the restroom. So talk among yourselves, please. I'll be back just as soon as I can, but there's no choice about this.
Take your time, brother.
Well, thank you very kindly. I'll have to. Anything before we move on? I know you had a lot of conversation. That's wonderful. The thing that is important about what the Swami has said here, the continuity of experience during dreamless sleep makes it necessary for us to admit a permanent self underlying all contents of consciousness. So that is the self that we discover when we learn to control the thought waves of the mind. So this is one of the indications we have from our experience of dreamless sleep, that the Swami says it forces us to admit that since, as Radhakrishnan, he quoted Radhakrishnan as saying, Mr. So-and-so goes to sleep. He has this period of dreamless sleep. He wakes up, and yet his life seems continuous. Why? Because that self, that birthless, deathless, permanent self, was indeed continuous. It had nothing to do with the contents of consciousness. So anything further before we read on?
So on that comment, brother, I'm still kind of stuck on that last part of the last sentence, all contents of consciousness. I mean, it seems like it's trying to say there's an entire universe of consciousness and we are underlying it, not quite
well,
sure.
There's consciousness with a small c, which is what I use the word awareness rather than consciousness to differentiate it. The contents of our waking awareness and what's not there during dreamless sleep is the product of our organs of perception, our organs of action, and their relationship with the mind. And that's what generates thought waves. In the mind stuff, which is actually throughout the body, it's not in the head. I mean, it's in the head, but it's not confined to the head. The chitta, the mind stuff, is in every cell of our body. And this is why when we go into the deepest form of meditation, as Sri Ramakrishna often did, he would appear to be dead. There didn't seem to be any vibration left in the body whatsoever. So there were no contents of consciousness, because the contents of small c consciousness or awareness is generated by those 11 cosmic principles, the 5 organs of action, the 5 organs of perception, and their relationship with the mind. That's what's meant by contents of consciousness. That got it?
Yeah, you got it. I'd like to fall back to something that we might have covered on the second sutra. And I think chitta is kind of defined or synonym as mind stuff. And and I'm kind of getting a little, I want to get clarified in the sense that we have chitta, mind stuff, we have manas, which is probably mind in some ways, we have buddhi, which is intellect, and we have ahamkara. All of these is kind of mind. Now, am I saying that correctly?
Ahamkar and buddhi are part of that permanent self. There is no buddhi in us per se. There's a reflection of the buddhi, which we refer to as intellect. You're right. There's a reflection of ahamkar, the I maker, which we refer to as the ego, our sense of separate self. It's an illusion. It's a delusion. There is no separate self. That is to say, the separate self and everything associated with it is part of a relative reality. It can't be classified as the capital R reality because it comes and goes. It's constantly changing. And so what appears in the chitta, which is vibration, vritti, is not confined to the head, not confined to those things that you gave as examples, but is actually in every cell of our body. Every cell of our body is vibrating, and cooperatively vibrating at that in a most remarkable fashion. We get there?
Yeah.
Good.
Thank you. Thanks for the clarification.
Mm-hmm. Anything else from anyone?
Yeah, Brother Shankara.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that most of the dreams are short-lived, maybe a few minutes. Rarely do they last a long time. I suppose we have multiple dreams. So most of the time we only remember the dreams. We don't really remember the dreamless state. Like you said, it's very...
There's no way to remember the dreamless state. We know it was there, and there are waves in the mind stuff during dreamless sleep. But no, we don't remember that period because as we're just about to go on, the memory has to do with objects. There's no object, there's no thing, there's no object in dreamless sleep. So we don't remember it. We know we had it because we wake up feeling rested. If we don't have dreamless sleep, we do not wake up feeling rested. If we sleep restlessly, in other words. Anything else before we go on? Okay. Memory is when perceived objects are not forgotten, but come back to consciousness. I'll repeat that. Memory is when perceived objects are not forgotten, but come back to consciousness. Memory is a kind of secondary thought wave. A wave of direct perception causes a smaller ripple or series of ripples. The thought wave of sleep also causes smaller ripples, which we call dreams. Dreaming is remembering in your sleep. The premise here is that we cannot bring anything into awareness that we do not already know. Know as what? As name and form, some sort of object. So is all that clear? Memory is when we recall a thought wave or series of thought waves that was not forgotten. The thought wave of sleep also causes smaller ripples, which we call dreams. Dreaming is remembering in your sleep. You have to remember it because you can't invent it out of whole cloth. That's why memory is a thought wave, and the Swami classifies it as a secondary thought wave. It's a thought wave about thought waves. So it's a little afternoon. Because of the interruption, I'm more than willing to stay on for as long as you'd like to stay. But I know that there are people who have budgeted their time in such a way that it won't be possible for them to stay. So if you go, namaste, and all the best to you. So,
Brother Shankara,
yes, dear.
Could you repeat just the last few sentences, please, about memory?
Okay, I'll read the whole thing. Memory is when perceived objects, in other words, something that has arisen due to the actions of our organs of perception, our organs of action, and their relationship with the mind. So it makes a mental impression. It makes an impression in the mind. Memory is when perceived objects are not forgotten, but come back to consciousness. Now, one of the reasons that this is such a key point for Patanjali is that as we practice contemplation, concentration, and meditation, we discover there's much more stored in this machine of ours than we knew. We discover, first we discover the first layer of our waking awareness. Then we discover our latent waking awareness, that which is, we kind of suppress thinking about it. And that is what is generated by our active subconscious, which is being acted on by the gunas and produces all kinds of thought waves, some of which we are willing to cognize and some of which we're not. When we begin to practice contemplation, concentration, and meditation, it becomes unavoidable for us to witness these things. We can't stay in that state. Why? Because they interrupt what we're trying to do. And so we'll find that there's a whole lot more, and we find this in dreams also. There's a whole lot more there How did I possibly dream of this? Where did I encounter that?
Mhm.
So when things come back to consciousness, either in our waking state, our dream state, or in the practice of contemplation, concentration, and meditation, we see memory is a kind of secondary thought wave. A wave of direct perception causes a smaller ripple or series of ripples. These are called mental impressions or samskaras. The thought wave of sleep also causes smaller ripples, which we call dreams. Dreaming is remembering in your sleep.
Mm.
Anything else about that? Any comments or questions?
It's interesting about this memory part. It seems like, especially talking of myself, as I'm quasi-retired and I don't have that eventful a day, it seems like these memories keep coming. And just like you said, I'm not quite sure where and how it shows up, but it does show up, and sometimes it's way, way back, multiple decades ago. So it feels
Yes,
like
oh yes. Usually those things that go back decades are associated with what are called knots of the heart. Something remains to be resolved. And some of them are pleasant, of course, and there's nothing to be resolved. But others of them are not pleasant. And so, and the calmer we get, like you say, your day is not occupied now because you're somewhat retired, semi-retired. You are calmer than you had been, less events of the day, so more memories come to the surface. Yes, indeed.
And
Brother Shankar.
Yeah,
Sorry.
let him finish what he was just about to say, then we'll go on.
so the second question to that, what do you do with these memories? Because now that it's coming, and again, depending on the content, it's probably painful or non-painful, klishta, that kind of thing. So what do you do with it? And does it matter whether they're mainly painful or mainly non-painful?
You're best served, it is most auspicious, if you can simply gaze at them. In other words, be in the witness position and simply look. This is what are the contents of my consciousness. If there is something to be resolved, then that becomes something for you, so to speak, a task for you. And there are many, many, many avenues to go down to resolve these knots of the heart. One of them is the development of self-compassion. If you develop compassion for yourself, then it becomes easier for you to be compassionate about whatever it was that caused this knot of the heart or painful memory. That's probably the strongest way to deal with it. There are other ways. Frank Badia was mentioning earlier that he's a counselor. There are people who are trained, very highly trained, to help us. What they actually do is they get us to direct our attention toward things that we haven't thought about as a way to deal with what because we've been trapped in a cycle of the knot of the heart. Anyway, there are lots of ways of dealing with those things. But the most auspicious way, from a meditator's perspective, from someone practicing toward yoga, is to simply gaze at them and just see that they are there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Great. Passive onlooker. Be the passive onlooker.
Yes, well, Jesus said, his shortest instruction, which is in the Gospel of Thomas, be passers-by. Be passers-by. Now, someone else had something.
Yes, Brother Shankara. Memory is such a complex thing, even, from a scientific perspective, there are so many kinds of memories.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any spiritual significance to someone having a sharper memory than somebody else, or about certain things? For example, my sister, who's just a year and a half older than me, remembers so many details about our childhood, whereas I don't. I'm just wondering the differences in memory. Does that mean?
Dear heart, I can't comment on why that might be. I mean, there are explanations that come to mind, but they'd just be frivolous. One thing that is true in the moment, right now, the more you practice contemplation, concentration, and meditation, the more your memory will improve. Both your short-term memory and your long-term memory. More things will come to mind. Who knows why in childhood, one child remembers when another doesn't. It just, you may have been more right brain dominant than she. So you weren't focused so much on the content of the passing moment, but as it was experienced by others, but what was in your imagination or your fantasy. Remembering that fantasy is not a bad word. Albert Einstein said the greatest gift that he had been given was the gift of fantasy.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anything else from anyone before
Brother
we go on?
Shankara?
Yes, dear.
I just wanted to clarify, what is the source of all the thought waves in every state of consciousness? Is it the mental samskaras?
It is the gunas touching on the samskaras.
Oh,
If you think of the samskaras, just think of the samskaras as this vast field of wind chimes. Vast, vast field of wind chimes. Some produce very beautiful musical tones. Others produce a kind of a dull thud. Along come the gunas. The guna of tamas is a slight smelly breeze that brings unpleasantness and so on. Along comes rajas, a stronger breeze, and it brushes against so many of the wind chimes, and they all seem to be clattering at once, and then there's the breeze of sattva that just seems to touch only those that produce a high, pleasing tone. The contents of each of these objectifications of memories or samskaras as wind chimes, I'm not talking about specifics. I'm just talking about the fact that it is the gunas, the actions of the gunas, brushing against, we think we're thinking our thoughts, we're generating our thoughts. Sri Krishna is very explicit, and the Vedas are very explicit, that it is not, we are not generating our thoughts, that the gunas are generating our thoughts. That's not a bad thing. It's just a thing. It's just
Okay.
one more instance where we think we are the doer when we're not.
No, that's the negating the ego,
Well,
process of.
I like what Tukaram says about the ego. Don't trade down, trade up.
Trade up.
Yeah. don't try to destroy the ego. Transcend it.
Those mental impressions are over lifetimes and lifetimes.
Well, we're told by Swami Vivekananda in Jnana Yoga that they actually stem from the dawn of creation. There was no mind at that point, in the sense that we think of mind as generated by the 24 cosmic principles. But there was vibration. That's the nature of the reality we experience. And so that which became jiva, a breathing thing, has all of that from the time that, in modern terms, the Big Bang occurred. In Vedanta terms, Hiranyagarbha burst and Jagat emerged.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else before we read on? Okay. 12. They, the thought waves, they are controlled by means of practice and non-attachment. They are controlled by means of practice and non-attachment. And this is what the steps of yoga teach us, what it means, what this practice is, and what non-attachment is. The other meaning of yoga, yoga means simultaneously, the word yoga means union and non-attachment. Those are the two meanings of the word yoga. Often you'll find it translated as detachment. 13. Practice is the repeated effort to follow the disciplines which give permanent control of the thought waves of the mind. Practice is the repeated effort to follow the disciplines which give permanent control of the thought waves of the mind. And of course, if we look at the first 6 limbs of yoga, these are the practices. 14. Practice becomes firmly grounded when it has been cultivated for a long time, uninterruptedly, with earnest devotion. Now, this may be the most important sutra in chapter 1. Notice its number is 14. 14 adds to 5, which is the number of change. Practice becomes firmly grounded when it has been cultivated for a long time, uninterruptedly, with earnest devotion. It will create change. Don't think these numbers are accidental. They are not. Practice becomes firmly grounded, that is to say, it achieves its aim, when it has been cultivated for a long time, uninterruptedly, with earnest devotion. So, are there any comments or questions about what is meant by a long time and uninterruptedly? Uninterruptedly means as much as you possibly can on a daily basis. And I mean as much as you can means being indomitable about it, not letting the things of the world, the people of the world, the events of the world. You set your priorities in such a way that I am going to do this. I'm going to do it at least in the morning, better morning and evening, and I'm going to do it every day, uninterruptedly, with earnest devotion. With earnest devotion means not just going through the motions, not just sitting on the cushion, so to speak. Doesn't have to be a cushion. Any proper seating that gives you the proper asana as defined is fine. But you can sit there for however many minutes is defined by you as enough practice. And you can just let your mind go over the events of the day, think about what's going to happen tomorrow, remember how wonderful it was to go on that vacation. This is not earnest devotion. You sat there for that length of time, and essentially you might as well have been doing something else. It's a little bit better than doing something else, but that's all. So any comments or questions before we read on? As I said, this may be the most important in terms of our instruction. This may be the most important sutra in chapter 1.
What is meant by a long time?
Robert, Swami Brahmananda defined it as at least 3 years. He says, you will begin to see the results of my instruction in 3 years. He actually said 2 to 3 years, but then, he emphasized the 3 years part. If you do what a teacher tells you, and Patanjali is emphatically a teacher, if you do these things for 2 to 3 years, with, as defined, uninterruptedly, with devotion, you will begin to experience the results. That then becomes self-reinforcing. you'll taste the nectar, as Sri Krishna says in the Gita. And having tasted the nectar, you begin to want to do it. Now, how long does it take to really reach the goal within Patanjali's definition of the goal? Well, the monk who came and taught Sri Ramakrishna the Advaita path said it had taken him 40 years. Now, 40 years seems like a long time to us. 40 years is nothing. If we think that we are cosmic beings, even this Atman, even this Jiva, which is the result of the evolved Atman. Evolved Atman? Yes, evolved Atman. It's 13.7 billion years old, according to the astrophysicists. What is 40 years? Does that answer your question, Robert? Okay. Anything else?
Brother Shankara,
Yes, dear.
regarding non-attachment.
We're going to
I
talk
think-
about that next.
Oh, okay.
Let's read the sutra before we go ahead to it.
Okay.
If that's okay with you. All right. Anything else on the one we just read? So the definitions are to become firmly grounded is to cultivate these practices for a long time, uninterruptedly, with earnest devotion. Non-attachment is self-mastery. It is freedom from desire for what is seen or heard. Now, this is Patanjali speaking, the great scientist, the great yoga scientist. Non-attachment is self-mastery. It is freedom from desire from what is seen or heard. Every one of the yoga paths that Swami Vivekananda left with us is a path to just exactly this: freedom from desire for what is seen or heard. In other words, what we find in our organs of perception, our organs of action, and what appears in the mind when we're no longer drawn to it. The opening of Chaitanya's prayer, which of course is the devotional path, but it says this: chant the name of the Lord and his glory unceasingly. In other words, uninterruptedly. Chant the name of the Lord and his glory unceasingly, that the mirror of the heart may be wiped clean. In other words, the reflection becomes perfect rather than fragmented or dimmed. That the mirror of the heart may be wiped clean and quenched, that mighty forest fire, worldly lust, raging furiously within, which is exactly equivalent to freedom from desire from what is seen or heard. Now, does that answer the question you were about to ask, Swayam, or is there something else?
No, it really answered what I had in mind. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else about the sutra before we go on to what the Swami says? The waves of the mind can be made to flow the waves of the mind. Now this is control of the thought waves of the mind. The waves of the mind can be made to flow in two opposite directions, either toward the objective world, the will to desire, or toward self-knowledge, the will to liberation. Swami Prabhupada used to hold up his two hands and he'd say, you have just so much energy in your life. You can put it into the worldly, and he would raise his left hand. And if you do it with these characteristics uninterruptedly, with devotion, you will succeed. You will become a very successful worldly person. Or, he said, you can take that same amount of effort and put it into the will, what is defined here as the will toward liberation. Spiritual practice. How long does it take to become a doctor or a PhD? That's the left hand. Takes a long time, a lot of dedicated effort. If you do the same thing, if you become what Krishna defines as a sannyasin, you don't have to take formal vows, you don't have to wear garawa to become a sannyasin. You become a sannyasin when you no longer desire the things of the world, what is seen or heard. In that direction lies liberation. So you can direct yourself either toward the objective world, the will to desire, or toward true self-knowledge, or toward worldly desire, or toward true self-knowledge, the will to liberation. Therefore, both practice and non-attachment, oh my, what in the world happened? Suddenly I got this Amazon thing on my screen. I have no idea what it means. Anyway, it's time for us to wind it up anyway. It's after 12, it's after 1:30. So any final comments or questions about practice or non-attachment? Well, thanks for sticking with it. Thanks for being patient about my mistiming of my meds today. Anything further from anyone at all? All right. Dearly beloved Lord, a flower at your feet for each one who comes to your open door. A flower at your feet for each one who stands by your open door and says, come to me, offering to break the world's chain that binds us down to ignorance, suffering, and death. A flower at your feet for each one who takes the path that you have struck through this, your jungle world. Om, Amen. Om, Amen. Om, Amen. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace. Peace be unto us and to all beloved beings everywhere. Jai Shri Guru Maharaj Ji Ki Jai. Durga Durga Durga. May you be safe. May you be healthy. May you be cheerful. May you have peace of mind. May you go forward in the loving and protective embrace of the Divine Being as our Mother and Father. Tomorrow at 11 o'clock, we'll celebrate the birthday of Swami Brahmananda, who was my teacher's teacher. Swami Prabhavananda's teacher was Swami Brahmananda, the first president of the Ramakrishna Order and the Ramakrishna Mission. The talk is titled, Lovest Thou Me? And then at the end of the talk, we'll have a short and informal worship of Raja Maharaj. Short, but, with the flowers, the lights, the incense, and an offering of some food. But it won't be a tantric worship. It'll just be the kind of worship that Holy Mother used to do. So, any final thought or question from anyone? All right, dears. Until tomorrow morning, or until the next time we see one another, Jai Ma, Jai Ma, Jai Ma.